Azetta Beatty, Senior Assistant Director of the Stuttgart Career Center, speaking first. And then we will have a panel with Sean Livingston and Sean Burns. So without further ado, let us welcome Azetta Beatty.
All right, good evening. Thank you for braving the temperatures to come out. I do have a few handouts for you guys, so I will just kind of hand those out. I'm giving you our fall brochure that the Career Center produces. Every semester we produce a brochure of our programs and upcoming events, and so I'm just handing that out. I'm also going to give you a job interview / handout. On one side you will find information about interviewing, just kind of basic things that sometimes not so basic. And then on the other side you'll find some sample questions, and we're going to do an activity with that just to make you really think about interviewing. And I do have a PowerPoint handout, which I'm not going to be walking through a PowerPoint, just to be clear, but I do have this handout so that, you know, for those of you that really want to read and kind of get the detailed information and reflect on it later, you have this handout. So, okay. So my goal here is to talk a little bit about interviewing, some basic things, you know, the do's, the don'ts, where you can find information from the Career Center. So I have our PowerPoint up, our website up. So I'm going to walk you guys through a few things on our website that shows you how to find information on preparing for interviews. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. So looking at the Career Center's website, the web address is just uky.edu/career-center. And this is the home page. Oftentimes we have upcoming events and activities on this home page. So you can always take a look at this to see what's coming up and what's happening. Usually some of the major events and activities. If you go to the students page, this is where you'll spend the majority of your time. This is where you'll find resources related to student career items. So you click on students, and you can see there's a list of items. So there's information on resumes and letters and interviewing and career fair prep and job search and graduate school and all those kinds of things. You guys are already in grad school, so that part may not apply so much. So then if you go on to interviewing, here you will find some basic interviewing information. Some of it is snapshot type information, others more detailed. So again, depending on how much you want to read or how much information you want, you may have already read some information or done some interviewing or prepared in some way. You may just be looking for a refresher. So this is a good place to go either for refresher or just start the process. So here you have some basic, really quick tips right here jumping out at you. And then we have a little YouTube video which summarizes really quickly in a few minutes. Here are some basics. And then we go on to some sample questions, things to prepare, you know, how to prepare yourself, a checklist. Checklists are great, especially again for those people that like to prepare for things and like to know, have I done what I need to do? Check, check, check. So this is a checklist. And then you have information on the type of interviews, some tips on following up after the interview. And it's always good to read this information prior to your actual interview so that you can be prepared. Because there's some things that you should follow up immediately, like at the very last second. Thank you for your time, and there's some follow-up things you should do right then and there. And then there's some follow-up things you would do a day or two later. So you want to look at this information in advance. So just wanted to show you that. Let me click on types of interview and say a couple words about this. So as far as the type of interviews go, there's the traditional, which is the face-to-face. It could be one person, like you talking to one person, or it could be a panel interview where several people are interviewing you. And when it comes to a panel, it could be 2 or more, basically. You could walk in a room and there are 8 people. So usually when it comes to preparing for your interview, you want to ask as many questions as possible about how should I prepare, who's going to be there. You know, because if you have a handout or extra copies of your resume or anything like that, or if you have a portfolio or anything you want to share, you want to have multiple copies and enough copies. But basically asking some basic questions about what can I anticipate. And there's some other things in terms of preparing, such as, where is it being located? Will I need to pay to park? Sometimes you don't think about those things. Other things to prepare would be depending on where it's being located and the time of your interview. you need to plan accordingly. So for example, if your interview's at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning, you got to think about rush hour traffic, you have to think about parking in general, you have to think about things like that. Do I have, meter, how early do I need to arrive? And, so there's things that sometimes aren't intuitive. You're not just going to think of that necessarily. The person can give you a schedule and say, your interview's at 9, and then at 10 o'clock you're meeting with this person, and then we have lunch at this time. You're like, yay, I'm ready to go. But then you didn't think about, oh wait, I have to pay to park. And I'm gonna have to park 2 blocks away. And those things you don't necessarily factor in if you haven't stopped and really thought about it. So on the checklist that's on the previous area, it does mention some of those things. So let me ask you guys a question. How many of you have already had at least one professional interview? Great. So do you have any general questions when it comes to interviewing because of that? Or were there things that happened at that interview and you thought, I wish I knew how to handle this question? Because that often happens. You're prepared somewhat, and then you get that question, you go, okay, what do I say to that? Any of those thoughts?
I know web interviewing is becoming a lot more popular.
Very common.
Trying to cut down on the cost of quality interviews. Do you have any tips for students that may not have the advantage of having that kind of face-to-face interaction that may have to do it all through a webcam?
Yes. In fact, one of our practice option that's available for graduate students is Interview Stream, and that is on our website. And you go through the Wildcat Career Link, and do you guys have a Wildcat Career Link account? You know what that is? No? Okay, I'll show you that in just a moment. So Wildcat Career Link is basically where we house our internships, our jobs, our upcoming events, and employer information and so forth. But on there we have this system called Interview Stream, and it is the practice interview is done with the webcam. It's a web option. That is how you do the practice interview. So that's a great way because it's so similar to a Skype in terms of you see yourself and you're talking and you see your mannerisms and all of those things, with the exception of it's a practice. So you get up to 3 chances to answer one question. You get to listen to it immediately and say, I hate that. What was I saying? What was I thinking? Or you start to answer the question, you're halfway through the answer and you think, okay, I don't know what I'm saying. And you just could stop and start over. So that's a nice thing. But at the same time, you're still watching yourself. Or maybe you go through the entire answer and then you go back and you watch the 2 minutes or so that you just finished talking and you think, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Right? Because there's things done verbals oftentimes that we do, we don't even realize it. So that prepares you not only for your actual face-to-face, but also for webcam types of interviews. When it comes to general preparation for webcam, you want to think about the same things you would do for a phone interview. So for a phone interview, you want to make sure that you are pronouncing your words. You want to make sure that you are using amazing expression in your voice and intonation. Your voice, your tones are going up and down. There's excitement, there's passion. So if you are speaking on a monotone level, it's not going to come across like I'm excited about this opportunity. So you really want to smile a lot. And think about when you're talking to a friend or buddy on the phone, you can within 5 seconds almost detect if they're in a good mood, bad mood, happy, sad, whatever's going on with them by their voice. And it's the same thing with a phone interview or with a Skype, with the exception that not only do they get your voice, they get your face as well. So a smart thing would be to maybe have a mirror off to the side that you kind of glance at every so often if you have that option. But you can typically see yourself anyway. But you don't want to also stare at yourself. So you don't want to get so caught up in looking at I'm looking around and doing that you don't even focus on what you're saying. So practice. When it comes to interviewing, if you remember nothing else, there is no substitute for practicing. Period. There is no substitute. You can read every tip in the world. You can read 3 books on interviewing, but if you don't stop and practice, you can tell yourself, if I get a question tell me about yourself, this is what I think I'll say. I think I'll say it this way. And that is not practicing. So we have to be very clear on what it means to practice. And basically what it means to practice is I ask you the question, tell me about a time you accomplished something in a short amount of time. Then you will start to say, well, there was one semester when I was working on you named the project. I had 3 weeks to do it. Something happened with my printer, whatever. Go through the details. And word for word, basically, the first word you say to the last word you would say. You don't ever want to stop mid what I'm going to say and go, okay, yeah, I think I'm going to tell that story about the time I had that project. And think you just practiced, because you didn't. So you started the effort, but you didn't truly practice. So that's why it's good if you do interview stream, or if you have a buddy or friend or somebody that can just run you through some questions, and you truly, when that person is doing that with you, they need to make sure you really answer the question and you don't stop and go, okay, I think I got this. And no, you didn't just practice. You didn't. Because what's going to happen when you get in that real interview and you start answering that question, you're pretty much going to get to the point where you stop in your practice and stop. Your brain's going to go blank because you haven't heard this story before. You haven't practiced this. You haven't heard this. You got the intro part down packed, and then you're like, okay, what do I say next? How do I say this? How do I express? You don't know because you haven't done it. So practicing is, just think about a person. If you go to a play, imagine if you go to see a play and the people haven't rehearsed over and over and over again. It's going to come across like that, right? Shaky and uncertain, and you're going to think this play was horrible. The acting was ridiculous. You're going to think it was bad. So it's kind of the same concept with going in. You're presenting yourself, and you want to present the best self. So if you don't practice, oftentimes you don't present the best self. You may really want that job, you may really want that opportunity, but you're not presenting the best self because you haven't prepared yourself properly. And do not give yourself the excuse that I don't have time. That is not an excuse. It is not an acceptable excuse, because do you want this job or not? That's what you ask yourself. Do you want to beat out the competition? Because it is fierce. There's one slot, there's 2 slots. There's you and 8 people that made it to the finals, or 3 people made it to the, if you get to the interview stage, that is amazing in and of itself. Please don't blow it at the interview, which is what a lot of times people do. As a career counselor, we see that all the time. We have on-campus interviews, and oftentimes the employers are there doing interviews, and they may have 10, 8 interviews that day. And sometimes during lunch or at the end, we'll say, well, how did it go today? How are the interviews? And employers will go, well, they were okay, or they were pretty good overall. There were probably 2 people that stood out of the 8 or 10 or 12 that they saw. And so they pretty much, at the very end of that interview, they can determine, okay, you're a yes or a no. I'm going to continue to consider you or not. You're prepared or you're not prepared. And they're not going to care about, I had this exam to do, I had this paper, I had all those kinds of things. So there's no substitute for practice. Say all that, say that. Because really that is my biggest point. That's the main point I want to make. I mean, because you guys can read the types of interviews, the types of questions, how to dress. You already know you're going to wear business attire to an interview. You already know that. I mean, you're going to make sure your hair is nice and guys are shaved and just clean cut and nice shoes and no scuffs and things like that. You already know I'm going to pay attention to detail. I'm not going to pull my shoes out and just slip them on and didn't clean them and all those kinds of things. I don't care if it was the muddiest, rainiest day ever. You will not walk in that room with muddy shoes on, okay? So if you have to change your clothes in their restroom or whatever you have to do, that's what you're going to do. So those are preparation kinds of, I am going to do every single thing within my power to make sure I don't blow it. Now at the end, the person is going to pick based on typically the best fit as far as they can tell. And sometimes you may be a great fit, but if you don't express that in your answers, again, practice. If you don't express that in your answers, they don't know it. You may have amazing experiences that's related. If you don't choose to share those experiences in your answers, they don't know it. So you have a lot of power on your side of the table. You can help yourself or hurt yourself by being prepared or not. So the more you learn about that particular industry you're getting into, so you guys learn about what types of things do they look for. We were talking about customer service types of things. It's not just I have the knowledge and I know the library system, catalog system, yeah, that's great. But if I can't communicate with people, if I can't engage them, if I can't think about, really truly listen to their concern and what they're saying they need while they walk in this door, or if they're calling me over the phone, listen to them, and then offer some suggestions, be patient, those kinds of things. If I have stories I can share where I had to do that, that will take you a long ways. So you got to think about specifically, what stories am I going to share? Not random stories. Truly think specifically, okay, I need a really good story where I was dealing with some customers, so I had to really be patient. I really had to talk someone through something, had to problem solve, I had to anticipate a problem and come up with a solution before it became a problem. Huge things. I know how to take the initiative. I know how to follow through. Oh my goodness. When we deal with employers, we get the litmus list of, please, here are our problems with new hires. They can't follow through. They won't follow through. Even when I give them instructions, they don't follow through. So it's like, do I have to tell you 5 times to do the same task before you do it? Why? Am I having to tell you 5 times to do the same task before you do it? So these are the kinds of things where they're saying, please, not only do your job, but anticipate, be helpful to the people around you, and all those kinds of things. So those are some of the examples you want to start thinking about. Not only some great examples of projects you've done in class, which can be really good, team building, working through something that didn't go your way. Maybe you were working on a project or a paper or something, and it was terrible. I mean, something happened, your printer broke, somebody didn't do their part, and you had to jump in and make it happen. Yes, you may have been frustrated, but did you jump in and make it happen? Or did you just say, well, I guess we're just going to get a seat, or I'm just not going to do that? I mean, in the real world of work, you really don't have that option. That's just the reality. If you have this project that is due and it has to go up, whatever the timeline is, you either find a way to work with your colleague to pull out what you need from them, or you do it. And you deal with, working with them later after that's done, just to get that project done. So there are so many things like that when we're talking to employers. Here's what we look for. Here's what we hope to draw out of individuals in the interview. What questions do you guys have? Yes?
What about in an interview when they ask you about your weaknesses?
Yes. They want a real weakness. They want something you're working on. They want something that you have identified as a weakness for yourself. They don't want a fluff weakness. They don't want sometimes I overhelp people. Although that may be a weakness, you got to really back that up with a really good story, scenario, why I chose that. Because they may think, okay, really? But when you give a good example of, well, for example, I was working on this particular project. Instead of me letting the person do their part, I was scared they weren't going to do their part, and so I did it for them, or I initiated it something like that. So that could be like your example, or I overhelp someone. So you really have to think they know you're real. Let me give you an example to touch on that. Last week we had a week of Industry Career Week is what we called it. And we had an employer panel come in on that Wednesday talking about how to impress your boss in the first 90 days. One of the panelists very specifically talked about the fact that if you don't identify your weaknesses prior to getting into the workforce and start working on them and know them honestly, it will smack you in the face when you get to the job. So for example, if you are terrible with organizing your time, if you organizing things, getting things done, following through, understanding directions, whatever your weakness is, if you haven't already identified that and started working on it, when you get into the job, that's going to be still a weakness for you because you haven't started working on it. And so one of the things they want to know is, are you honest enough to identify that you have weaknesses, and are you working on it? So it's not so much they're trying to say, oh, you got a weakness, we don't want you. It's just, are you honest enough to say, are you the person that thinks you're right all the time and you have no weaknesses, you have no issues? First of all, no one likes to work with that person, just to be honest. No one likes to work with people that feel like, I'm always right. I don't ever make a mistake. I never drop the ball. That kind of thing, because we all do. But if you're honest about it and you just kind of, here's my plan to not make that happen, then people more likely want to work with you. And they feel like they're really seeing you and they know how they're going to need to work with you. Sometimes they just want to know how they're going to need to work with you in the workplace. So if they know their weaknesses is, they can couple you with someone who's strong in that area, or they can get you some training or, something like that. I feel like my time is up. Do you guys have any other questions?
Can you show us how to sign up for an account?
I can, yes. And please just ask me questions if you have any. Over here, you'll see telephone and screening interviews, which is, a type of interview. You can take some of those tips and apply it to the webcam option. With webcam, you always want to double check your connections. So there's some basic things like that, just making sure your connections are up and running 10, 15 minutes before you need them. Well, really long before that. You want to check it like long before that, just in case. Make sure whatever device you're using is charged. Just basic things like that. And check your volumes on your mic. So there's, some really, I say basic, but
Don't do any software updates like the day before. 'Cause people have done that really
Yes.
quick. So if it's working the week before, leave it alone.
Right. So on our website, this is a home page. If you go to the bottom of the home page, you see Wildcat Career Link. This is what I was telling you guys about the system where you can, basically it's a free online system that UK has already paid for your option to use it. But if you go here and click on Student and Alumni, that opens up. And then if you click on Register, then it just gives you the option to put in your student information. And there's only a little information that's required initially. I do recommend you go in and fully complete the form and all of the information once you get into the account. But initially, just to get you started, this will give you access to all the jobs and internships and employer research, employer information, contact information, interview stream, which I mentioned, and the nice thing about interview stream also is there's no limit to how many of those practice interviews you can do. And you can customize them. We have some sets of questions that we've set up just for a person to go in. We even have one called general communication, set of questions. But you can customize, you can go through and pick customized questions based on industry or type of job, or what have you want to get into.
Question.
Yes.
You mentioned student or alumni was the option. So for our recent grads who are wanting to prepare better, would they be also able to use this resource as an alumni?
If you graduated from UK within 6 months, you can make an appointment with us. If it's longer than 6 months, then you have to go through the Alumni Association. Yes.
I actually tried to go to Career Center to have them put on my resume about 2 months ago, because one of the things we do submit for our graduation portfolio is our professional resume. And I was told that they didn't serve graduate students. I was actually referred to the Alumni Center.
Right.
They told me that they wouldn't help me unless I joined the Alumni Association.
That's correct. The Career Center is an our center is an undergraduate resource. So the way we serve graduate students is via our online services primarily. If you are 6 months post-graduation from undergrad, we can still serve you. If not, then we won't make a one-on-one appointment with you. Now you can use like Wildcat Career Link, you can use Interview Stream, you can use all of our online resources. You can come to all of our events, our employer showcase, our workshops, conferences. All events are open to you. The only thing you cannot do is make a one-on-one appointment. So it's kind of like 90% of the stuff you can do, that 10% can't do.
I was just curious because I wasn't sure
Yeah.
what Alumni was actually.
But the Alumni Association is where most grads or alums, post 6 months go, and you do have to join the association. I think it's $40 a year. It may even be less for students. But
Thank you.
you're welcome. Any other? Okay, I was going to ask you guys to pair up and do this activity, but we don't have time for that. So I do say, I do encourage you, maybe even, I don't know if you have extra meeting time sometimes where you want to make this real, but is those questions that I gave you guys, that's just a few questions just to get you started thinking about questions I can answer. And we do have information on answering behavior-based questions versus traditional questions, because that's a little different spin. So one of my points today, I guess, is to just really hammer home that you really need to practice. You really need to practice what it is you're going to say from the very first word to the last word, making sure you give descriptive information, great details, relevant examples, not just a random example about a time I had a crisis and, random ethical dilemma. You really want to think about, okay, what ethical dilemma did I have maybe related to this field I'm trying to get into, or something related to education or something. Try to make it as relevant as possible, because the more applicable you make it, the more likely they can see you fitting into that position. If it's too random and you have all these great examples you could have chosen, but you just chose that one that wasn't really related, they don't really get to see a true picture of you. So, you know, you can hurt or help yourself. You really have a lot of power on your side of the table. Other quick thing about interviewing, it's okay to pause. It's okay to be nervous. Every single person is nervous. I mean, even if you interview 5 times, here's your 5th time, and you're still a little nervous going in. However, if you are prepared, if you have practiced answering questions, if your attire is good and you feel comfortable in your suit, please don't get a suit you don't feel comfortable in, try to go interview in it. So there's things like that. Put it on, try it on, sit down in it, walk around in it. Make sure you feel good. Make sure you look good. You know, confidence is gonna come out. And just in you, before you open your mouth, they've already made a judgment about you. As you're approaching the person, if you're smiling, you're extending your hand, saying your first and last name, great to meet you, shaking a real firm handshake, not like wimpy stuff. No, that's like weak confidence and what are you doing? But firm. So there's some basic things they do assess before you even answer the first question. So you really want to think about that. And some of that is addressed on our checklist that we have on the website. Things. Now I'm talking. What do I say? I sit up straight. I don't slouch. I don't swing. I don't, you know, nonverbals. So it is good if you don't have a person to help you with your practicing or even your first go round. Maybe look in a mirror and just do it looking in a mirror. Practice answering the questions. Or if you're cleaning a house or you're washing something and you just want to practice getting the words out. I'm going to tell this story. Here's what I would say. And you're ironing and you just, you know, you're driving and you, whatever to get it out initially. Make it happen, because that's going to really serve you, because you will have said that story and it's not the first time you're trying to put it together when you're in front of the person that matters the most or the panel. So you want to think about those things. But anyway, if you guys don't have any questions, I will stop now and let your next speakers come up. Any questions? Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for coming.
We're going to take a short recess and reset.